Hey everyone, I have an important update for you today, as if hopefully all of my videos are important, but this one's super important. So I've explained before that my number one most favorite thing to read is anything that is anti-Bitcoin. Just literally, I mean, if anything comes up on my Twitter feeds, if anything comes up when I Google the word Bitcoin, if anything, a new book pops up on Amazon, anything that is anti-Bitcoin is absolutely immediately goes to the very top of my stack. And because with more than 97% of my liquid net worth in Bitcoin, obviously if I'm wrong about Bitcoin, I want to know about that as soon as conceivably possible. And so, obviously I read everything I can possibly get my hands on, including I've read every single anti-Bitcoin or anti-crypto book that's ever been published. I've read them all, 100% of them, all of them. I've read them all. And almost every anti-Bitcoin article that's been published online as well. Although I'm sure there's a few I've missed along the way somewhere, but I've read pretty much all of them. Okay. So yesterday, a new article came out, and I want to read you excerpts of it because it fundamentally misunderstands how money works. And so often you'll hear these critiques of people saying, Bitcoin is useless. Nobody uses Bitcoin. In fact, in a debate I did at Freedom Fest this summer, which you can go watch at bitcoinbubblemyth.com. That's the word Bitcoin Bubble Myth, myth spelled M-Y-T-H, bitcoinbubblemyth.com. You can go watch the debate. One of the arguments that we were debating was one of the people that was opposed to Bitcoin was saying, they often have big groups of people raise their hand if they've used Bitcoin in the last year. But they define using as using it to purchase something like a coffee. But what they don't understand is that the vast majority of money, the vast majority of time, is a store of value, not a medium of exchange. Money is used as a medium of exchange very infrequently, and as a percentage of time, a very, very, very small percentage of the time. So let me tell you what I mean. So money has three purposes. Well, first of all, I will get to reading you some excerpts from the article, but I want you to understand this first. Money is defined as having three uses. One is a medium of exchange. That means you use it to buy stuff. The other is a store of value. That means you plan to use it to buy something later, but not right now. And the third is as a unit of account, meaning it's used for accounting, profit and loss statements, and products are priced in that currency. For example, you walk into a grocery store. Now, everybody admits when a new currency comes into being or something is becoming monetized like Bitcoin, that the unit of account function happens much later. So nobody's complaining that everything's not priced in Bitcoin today. So we're going to ignore that one for the time being because it'll probably be another 5 or 10 years before you walk into the grocery store and everything is priced in Bitcoin instead of US dollars. So that leaves two of the three. Since unit of account is something we'll leave off the table for now, since everybody admits that that happens later in the adoption of a new monetary system. So that leaves store of value and medium of exchange. Well, for people who really understand Bitcoin, they understand that in order for something to be a medium of exchange, it has to be a store of value first. Nobody will exchange something of value for something else if what they are getting in return is not a store of value. So people seem to think that money has to be a medium of exchange without realizing that it can only be a medium of exchange if it is first a store of value. Because if it's not a store of value, nobody's going to exchange for it. Why would you exchange something of value for something that was not yet a store of value? By definition, money has to be a store of value. Okay, so and with the adoption of any sort of new money, you typically go through four stages. You first go through collectible, and then the collectible becomes a store of value, and then that store of value is used to transact, which is when it turns into a medium of exchange, and then it eventually becomes a unit of account, which is the fourth stage. Okay, so knowing that, I want to run through some numbers here. So when you hold money, the average person, if you use contactless payments, like if you just, buy stuff by holding your phone up or snapping a QR code or whatever it is, if that is how you buy stuff, then you are using money as a store of value about 99.9% of the time, meaning you are you're using money as a medium of exchange about 0.1% of the time, which is about 1 minute and 26 seconds a day. So since everything I buy is with contactless payments, that is about where I am. I use money, all forms of money, even though I use Bitcoin. But even before I was using Bitcoin, even with US dollars, I was using it as a 0.9% of the time. And I was only using it as a medium of exchange probably 1 minute and 26 seconds a day, which is 0.1% of the day. That means 99.9% of the time, money was just sitting there doing nothing, waiting for me to buy something later. And so once you understand that, you realize when something is being monetized, like Bitcoin, you're not going to use it as a transactional medium in the early stages of adoption, but that will come later. And even so, okay, no idea why I'm having internet troubles. So even if if you're like me, you use any sort of money, whether Bitcoin or US dollars, as a store of value 99.9% of the time, and as a medium of exchange 0.1% of the time, which on a daily basis is an average of 1 minute and 26 seconds, which is literally the time it takes for you to activate Apple Pay on your watch and bump it against the payment terminal. And if you do that, 5 or 10 times a day, and it takes 5 or 10 seconds each, you're in the ballpark of 1 minute and 26 seconds, which is 1/10 of 1% of the day spent where your money's actually buying something. The other 99.9% of the time, your money is just sitting there. So even for people who pay for stuff with checks, if it takes you 7 minutes to buy stuff every day, meaning you're the person in the grocery store line that pays by check and literally stands there for 3 minutes filling it out. If you're that sort of person, you're probably not spending more than 7 minutes per day transacting with your money, which means 99.5% of the time, 1/200th of the time you are transacting with your money. And that means 199 200ths of the time, which is 99.5% of the time, your money is just sitting there. Okay, so once you understand that, even if all you do with Bitcoin is you buy it and then you hold it for 2 years, you are still transacting. You are transacting by converting Bitcoin, US dollars to Bitcoin, and then at some later time when you need to buy stuff or make your life better for you or your family somehow, you are converting it back into whatever it is, or you're using it to buy something. But that is your points of which you're using it as a medium of exchange. You're exchanging it for something else. The same is true of gold. So gold is the number one asset in the world right now. It's worth about $18 trillion. Bitcoin's about 1.8 trillion. So all the gold in the world is about 10 times as valuable as all the Bitcoin in the world. And my prediction is that will be flipped at some point where Bitcoin will be more valuable than gold. But all the central banks that are buying gold, 0% of them plan to convert it into an some industrial use or into jewelry. 100% of them bought it with fiat currency, meaning government printed currency, and 100% of those central banks intend at some point to convert it back by selling it back into a fiat currency. But nobody says it has no monetary value just because they don't buy coffee with it. They hold it and then they transact with it infrequently, which is what a lot of people do with Bitcoin right now. So once you understand that holding Bitcoin is using Bitcoin. You're just using it, the way any currency is used, which at a minimum is typically 99.9% of the time it's sitting there doing nothing. In the case of Bitcoin, if you buy it and mostly just use US dollars, maybe that means you're holding it 99.99% of the time, and you're transacting with it by selling into or out of US dollars as needed, 1/100th of 1% of the time. Okay, so once you understand that using Bitcoin, holding Bitcoin is using Bitcoin. That is a fundamental use. Then it makes sense why this guy who wrote this article, why his arguments don't make sense. All right, so I'm going to read some of the sections of this guy's article to explain why he just fundamentally misunderstands how money works and all of that. All right, so the headline of the article, let me get situated where I can hold multiple things at one time. So the headline of the article is "Bitcoin is booming, but it is still useless." Again, he's going to say it's useless because people don't use it to buy stuff on a daily basis. He says key questions about cryptocurrency remain unanswered. They're only unanswered because he hasn't even bothered to Google it or type his questions into ChatGPT, which has all the answers, or go on YouTube, which also has all the answers. It says key questions remain unanswered even as the price soars. What the fans can't say is what any of it is supposed to be for or what it actually does. Now, then he'll go on to make the accusations about why it's useless, and the title of this is Bitcoin is booming, but it is still useless. Well, the guy admits that in his reporting at one point, someone offered him 200 Bitcoin, 200. Someone offered this guy 200 Bitcoin just so he could play with it and use it and understand how it works. At the time, it was worth $38. And rather than go buy, $38 worth of Bitcoin himself, he decided to ignore it because he was just anti-Bitcoin. He just fundamentally, philosophically, he was anti-Bitcoin. So he didn't want Bitcoin. He didn't want $38 of Bitcoin. And right now, that $38 would have been worth $18 million in US dollars, 18 million. So he turned down 200 Bitcoin. And he's been salty ever since. So this guy keeps writing articles about why Bitcoin has no value and why it's useless and all that. And he really wants it to be not to have value and not to be useful, because otherwise, he admits here, I still live in a rented basement flat. As Bitcoin fans like to say, I have stayed poor. So this guy doesn't like Bitcoin. He had a chance with Bitcoin. He fumbled the ball, did not accept the Bitcoin. Even for ethics rules, if he couldn't accept a $38 gift, he could have turned around and bought 200 Bitcoin with his own money for $38. Of course, he did not. And so the rest of the article goes on and it says, I'll read some quotes here. What the crypto boosters still have failed to do is convince me that there is any serious use case for Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency. He says, again, reading more, 15 years after Bitcoin was created, no one uses it as a currency. Again, here you can understand he misunderstands how a currency works, and that holding a currency is using a currency. Those are the same thing. Holding is using. And he said lots of people are trading crypto, but almost no one actually is using it for anything. Once again, he misunderstands that holding a currency is using a currency. You are using its store of value properties when you are holding Bitcoin. And then he takes some other swipes at Bitcoin, that don't make any sense. For example, he says at one point, for those putting money in at the right time and knowing when to sell, have been huge fortunes to be made. Again, even that's wrong. Nobody in Bitcoin's advocating that you try to time when you buy it or when you sell it. Like any currency, you buy it, you hold it for as long as possible till you need something else. That goes for anything, any currency that gains value over time, which Bitcoin does. Obviously, the US dollar loses value over time, but that is a fault of the United States Federal Reserve. It's not inherent to the way money is supposed to work. Money is not supposed to work where it loses money over time. That is just flawed human nature imposed on it with government money printing. So all this guy's arguments come down to the words, it's useless, it has no use case, nobody uses it to buy stuff, nobody's using it as a currency, and he just fundamentally misunderstands that using a currency, holding a currency is using a currency. You are using it for the thing that people use it for 99.9% of the time, which is as a store of value, and you only transact with it maybe 0.1% of the time if you use contactless payments, which are much faster, maybe 0.3% of the time, which is about 3 or 4 minutes a day, if you use a credit card and it takes a while to swipe and enter your PIN and all that sort of stuff. And even if you're using checks and you're manually filling out a check for every single one of your purchases, even so, there's no way you're transacting with your money more than 7 minutes a day, which would mean 0.5%, 1/2 of 1%. And the other 99.5% of the time, your money's just sitting there doing nothing. So once you understand that, you'll understand all these hit pieces people write about, Bitcoin, nobody's using it to buy coffee, nobody's using it, it's useless, all that sort of stuff. They just fundamentally misunderstand that the store of value function of money is a super important value aspect of money, and that the store of value aspect of money always precedes the medium of exchange function of money. So eventually, Bitcoin will be the money everyone uses worldwide. In the meantime, it is the money people like me use on a daily basis for literally everything with the Coinbase debit card. And even people who only transact much more infrequently by buying Bitcoin with US dollars and just sitting on it for a long time and then selling it, they are using it as a medium of exchange to convert in and out of US dollars very infrequently. But they are still using Bitcoin's store of value properties, which is what money does the vast majority of the time. It just sits there. Same with the US dollar. It's the vast majority of the time it's not in transit. The vast majority of all US dollars are in a static place the 99.9% of the time. So anyway, if you understand that, you'll understand why this guy's thesis doesn't make any sense, and happy to answer any questions about this. But to recap, money, when something is getting monetized, it goes through four phases: a collectible, then a store of value, then a medium of exchange, then a unit of account. Bitcoin is solidly in the store of value camp and is in the early stages of the medium of exchange camp. And like any currency, the vast majority of the time it is being used as a store of value, and that everyone who has ever owned Bitcoin has used its store of value properties. And if they got Bitcoin by exchanging it for US dollars or back again, they have also used Bitcoin's medium of exchange properties. And for people like me who buy everything with Bitcoin, I'm using the medium of exchange properties constantly. But even though I use Bitcoin exclusively for virtually 100% of my purchases, I still am only using it as a medium of exchange 0.1% of the time. Again, all of my transactions that I do with Bitcoin, if you totaled up all of my transactions, I probably make 5 or 10 transactions a day. If you total them all up, since I'm using Apple Pay for all of them with Bitcoin, and it takes like literally 2 seconds to, bump my watch against the payment terminal, there's no way that the total amount of time I'm spending using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange exceeds 1 minute and 26 seconds per day, which means in my case, I'm using Bitcoin as a store of value 99.9% of the time, and I'm using it as a medium of exchange 0.1% of the time. And that's coming from somebody who's completely 100% Bitcoin. I have no reason to buy stuff more frequently. I have no reason to believe that I will buy stuff more frequently or that it will take longer to buy stuff in the future than right now. Which means in a world where everybody is using Bitcoin to buy everything all the time with contactless payments with their iPhone or their Apple Watch or with, automatic payments for Netflix or subscriptions or whatever, no matter how you're using it, in the future, the average person will use Bitcoin as a store of value 99.9% of the time. They'll use it as a medium of exchange 0.1% of the time. And people like this guy who wrote the article that Bitcoin is booming but it's still useless, he will still be scratching his head. And that $18 million of Bitcoin that he missed out on by not accepting $38 of free Bitcoin when he could, he will still be writing articles about why it all doesn't make sense to him and why he's upset about it and why it doesn't, it just doesn't make sense. So part of what inspired this video was there was a guy named Jim who used to be on my Facebook page, but he never had anything productive to say. So eventually he just, he refused to accept free Bitcoin. He refused to be open-minded, and he just left snarky comments. So finally I blocked him. He's the only person I've ever blocked on Facebook is like this one guy, other than obviously scammers who pop up relatively frequently. But anyway, I blocked him because I kept offering him $100 of Bitcoin. I think at one point I offered him $300 of Bitcoin. I can't remember. I know I went up to $100. I think at one point before I blocked him, I was like, look, do you want $300 of Bitcoin? And the guy was even local. So I'm like, look, do you want $300 of Bitcoin? I'll even treat you to lunch, which doesn't cost you anything. We can go to lunch. I'll give you $300 of Bitcoin, and you can actually be open-minded and learn. Well, he didn't want to be open-minded. He didn't want to learn. He just wanted to say snarky stuff about Bitcoin. And every time I tried to offer him free Bitcoin, and every time I tried to send him like the world's most accessible stuff, like, hey, watch this 5-minute video, like this 5-minute video, like you can't possibly not understand Bitcoin after this 5-minute video. He just wouldn't engage. Like he refused to watch anything, refused to read anything, refused to get together to discuss it, refused to accept free Bitcoin. And he was just like this guy. Like he wanted to have a snarky opinion, but he never was willing to open his mind even 1% to understand how money works, how Bitcoin works, or what benefit it might have to him. And so as a result of that, I've been waiting for somebody to write a, snarky, stupid article that I could critique and point out how they're wrong. And this is as good as article as any for that, because again, very often, the fundamental misunderstanding that all these articles are based on is that they can't understand how it's a currency if everyone is not using it all the time to buy stuff. And again, they just misunderstand how currency works, and they misunderstand what % of the time any currency is being used to buy stuff, which is a microscopically small % of the time that you're actually transacting with any currency. The vast majority of the time, it's just a store of value, just like Bitcoin. And everybody that owns Bitcoin right now, hundreds of millions of people are using it as a store of value right now, even if all they ever did was buy it with US dollars with the intent at some point in the future of selling it for US dollars. It is still useful for them as a better way of storing value than anything else they could have put that money in. And Bitcoin's outperformed every other asset in the last 10 years. So nothing's even close. So anyway, hopefully that helps. Summary is, if you have ever held Bitcoin, you have used Bitcoin. And Bitcoin store of value functions will continue to be its primary functions for a long time in the future. And even when the world is fully 100% monetized and everybody uses Bitcoin for everything, Bitcoin will still be 99.9% a store of value and 0.1% a medium of exchange for that little tiny instant where you activate Apple Pay on your watch, you hold it up against the payment terminal, the value changes hands, and boom, you're done. You're back to both sides of the equation using Bitcoin as a store of value, just like they do with US dollars. So let me know if you have any questions. Happy to answer absolutely anything anyone has, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thanks.